All right, Tony Shore, welcome back to another episode of Paladin Financial Talk. How are you, Tony?
I am great. Do you know what I did last weekend?
Tell me.
It's exciting. I got on a plane, flew to Las Vegas to see U2 at the Sphere.
Okay.
It is the world's greatest concert venue. And I'm so thankful that I got to make it. My friend, a buddy of mine in Nashville, we grew up together, good friends. He said, let's go. And I go, the money and the time. And he goes, I'm buying the tickets and paying for the hotel room. You just have to get the flight out. So I did it. It was one of the most unbelievable experiences. Everybody needs to see this.
Fantastic. So you're the first person that I've heard that has now done a show at the Sphere. So
it is incredible.
Okay, good to hear.
It's like 10 stories tall. It's the world's largest LED screen.
Yeah.
It's high definition LED. And it really messes with your mind because they make you look like you're outside and everything on it looks so real. And there's not a bad seat in the house. The seats are comfortable. It's a state-of-the-art venue, and the acoustics, the sound is so good.
How fun.
Yeah.
Every time I think of U2, we have a friend that we worked with many years ago, and his dad was a huge promoter, and he brought U2 to the United States for the first time many years ago. And so there's a little place in my heart for all the stories that we heard that went along with that. So combined a lot of cool things right there, Tony. So congratulations. How exciting.
Wow. Yeah, that was fun. How about you? You've been busy too.
We have been busy, but that might lead us right into this show. So Christmas is coming, clearly,
it is.
And shopping for gifts and all of that. So, Tony, have you heard of the books? There's a series of them. If you give a mouse a cookie, or if you give a pig a pancake.
I've heard the give a mouse a cookie one.
There you go. Okay, so there's a whole series of them. We have the pig one, the mouse one. There's a moose one, if you give a moose a muffin. So they just keep going.
Give a moose a muffin.
That's right. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about that. So if you were to give a pig a pancake, what would that pig want?
Probably maple syrup and butter.
Maple syrup
and
butter.
That's what I would want.
Exactly. And if you give a pig, of all kids, pigs, people, if you give them syrup, what happens?
They get sticky.
They get sticky, and they're going to need a bath. Well, that's exactly how this book goes, or all of these books go. It's this chain reaction.
Sure.
And so moral of the story of these books are, every decision creates a chain reaction that builds upon, one another. And it is so practical. It's children. So first of all, let me say, as Christmas is coming, I would recommend these books if you were buying for, let's say, kids age 5 and under. These are a great series. But my point in bringing these up are that chain reaction that happens. Well, it happens in the financial side of our world as well. So let me...
Nice segue.
That is. See, you did it, actually. You set it up. We didn't even know we were going to do this. Okay, so let's take this concept and apply it to the financial perspective, since we understand it from a children's book perspective. Have you ever opened a retirement account like an IRA or a 401k?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Most people have through their employer.
Yep.
Well, when you do this, you're making A, a financial decision, B, a tax decision, and you're even making an estate planning decision. And most people don't think about it, especially if they're early in their career and they're just going through the motions of getting something set up. But at Paladin, we are big believers in that most financial decisions are impacting your taxes as well as your estate planning. So those decisions all go together. They're interconnected. And so when you're opening something like a 401k, you have options like doing a Roth conversion, right? Or doing a Roth or a 401k. So you have all these decisions that you're making along the way. Tony, you've probably been through this. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it is. And I see your point here. One decision affects another and another. There is a chain reaction. If you have a 401k or start an IRA, it affects your tax situation.
Got it.
It has tax implications. And then on, it also can affect your estate planning in the future, depending on what you do now, right?
I do a lot of our writing for our social media, and it's year-end deadlines right now. And as I'm writing those, you start to think, well, why do they care? And you keep going through that series of, but why? And you can keep digging a little bit deeper. I said, accidentally Roth conversions a second ago, that's a big year-end deadline.
Yes.
And why would that be important right now? Well, there's a deadline. If you do want to convert some of that traditional money into a Roth situation so that you're paying taxes now, well, why does that really matter if I miss this year? Well, taxes are scheduled to go up, December 31st of 2025 or January 1 of 26.
Right.
And so that means you only have a few years to take advantage.
You only have a couple of years to really take advantage of the current low tax rates, which are at historic lows, right? I mean,
You got it.
it's the lowest tax rates we've seen in years, maybe ever.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Your decisions it's a financial decision to make a Roth conversion.
Sure.
It becomes a tax decision, and then ultimately taking advantage of the lower tax rates. Because why? Well, it impacts your estate if you want to pass some of those funds on to your heirs and so forth. So you can see how all of this just wraps, and we could probably keep giving example after example, but the point I think is probably taken as we've talked about a few of these things.
Sure.
And so, Tony, with that, I want to welcome us to our topic today, and that is on estate planning. In fact, this is going to kick off an entire month of us talking about estate planning. And today we're just going to keep it very basic, where we're going to do some key documents that might be important for estate planning and just some other practical things to think about. So let's do this.
Yeah, like we're talking about wills and trusts, right?
You got it. You named it
and
there.
the main reason our listeners need to understand this is you were alluding to it earlier, is you want to minimize that tax burden for your loved ones.
There you go.
And decisions you make this year before the end of the year can affect the tax burden for your loved ones years from now, right?
You got it, Tony.
Yeah.
That's absolutely is right. And we're hoping over this next month you're going to hear from a few of us, but we are also going to have one of our estate planning attorneys on so that we can dig in and we can get some good information out to all of our listeners over the next 3 to 4 weeks here. So let's start with some of those key documents. So the first one is a will. I think that's probably a word that people have heard. Understanding that it's simply a legal document that outlines how you want your assets to be distributed upon passing. Now, a will typically will go through probate, and that might be a term that some aren't familiar with, but we're going to talk about it here in just a little bit. But there are some exceptions that your assets might not go through probate, but in most cases, even when you're using a will, they go through probate. Another one is a trust, and I think you mentioned that one as well. It's, again, a legal arrangement that takes place, and it's where a trustee holds assets for the benefit of a beneficiary. And they can be helpful in, one, avoiding probate. I think that's what most people, when they say, should I do a will or a trust, they think of probate, and I'm trying to avoid that.
Yep.
It can help reduce taxes and just protect your assets overall. And so that might be something worth exploring. What we do when we meet with our clients, Tony, is we go through and we ask them a series of, do you have a will? Do you have a trust? Another one that we ask them is power of attorney. It's another important document for estate planning, and this one allows you to appoint someone to make either financial or medical decisions on your behalf if you were to come, if something was to happen to you.
Right.
And so that's a key one. And again, there are different types of power of attorney, and that relates to medical or financial. And then finally, one that we ask is the Advanced Healthcare Directive, and this document outlines your medical wishes and if you're unable to make a decision for yourself. So those are some of the key documents that we look at and we ask if they have in place.
Well, but there's another one I've heard of, and my grandpa did this with his land for my dad, and that's a transfer on death deed.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that one up. It is. We have a kind of checklist, and I went through 4 of our 5 there, but that's actually one of the first ones we do ask about in a meeting, and thank you for including that one. So we talk about it regularly with our clients, and we actually had somebody the other night. We were in a workshop. We host, our evening workshops, and that was one of the questions he asked as well. It's a situation where you have a legal document that allows you to transfer ownership of your property, so your real estate property, to someone upon death. Now, when you do that, again, another situation where you avoid probate, you transfer it to the beneficiary. And the key with this one is not all states recognize those. But because we're here in Minnesota, I wanted to point out that Minnesota does recognize that. Yeah.
Yep.
And Wisconsin does as well, which I think is important when we neighbor so closely. So
yes.
Both of those states recognize that. So thank you, Tony, again, for bringing that one up.
Yeah, my dad, fortunately, my grandfather had it set up that the farm transferred on death
Yeah.
to my dad. So it makes it easier.
Absolutely. You think about all you can do ahead of time. So many times people don't want to face it or have the conversation, and the communication becomes a key piece.
Yeah.
But if you can do some of these things, it really allows your beneficiaries and your loved ones to grieve and enjoy the memories and all the positives. When somebody passes, it's not a positive, but there's some really precious time that you have with family and friends. And if they're not worrying about these pieces, that is a gift that you can give to them.
Plus, you don't want to leave your loved ones in a bad situation.
Exactly.
With burdens.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Exactly. And that can come in the sense of stress that goes along with understanding, scrambling to gather documents, not having access to assets when you need to pay things. I mean, that list can go on. And so anything that you can do to help and assist in getting the estate set up before passing is a gift to your loved ones. So there's three types of property that I want to talk about. And this is where you start to get deep, and we want to keep this as high level as possible for our listeners here. But there's probate, contract, and joint tenants. And so, Tony, do you know what the word probate means?
Probate means to prove or proof. Ooh. Proof, right?
You got it, Tony. Yeah. I thought that you might know. You do enough of these shows with us, and you've been around financial services enough to know that it means to prove in a very basic manner. So understanding things like personal property, some of the basics, people have a pretty good idea of recognizing those things might go through probate. But let's talk about probate. So if people want to write these things down, it's a good to kind of jot some notes down here. But the first is property that's in one's name. So that might be a car or a cabin. That's something that would go through probate. Investment accounts fit into that category as well when that would fit under that category. Another one would be personal property that is not titled. So, Tony, tell me what that means to you. What would be personal property that you can think about?
Well, like if they have antiques or jewelry or some big collection that's worth money, possibly a record collection.
You got it. And those are the kind of things you've heard stories. In fact, I just heard a story last week because we've been talking about estate planning quite a bit in our office. Somebody went, brothers and sisters. The first person that got to the house was the person that started to take all the goods, right? So somebody passed. That happens, and you hear that. And what happens within a family when somebody does that? Well, you can imagine that that's not a good situation. But those are the easy things to get your hands on: the jewelry, the gun collection, and so forth.
Yeah.
Tony, since you and I both have some farm background in us, so think about the farmers that you grew up with. When they have crops that are in the grain bins or something of that nature, do you think that falls under personal property as well?
I'm not 100% sure. I think that it probably would, but yet if it's in a building on the land.
Could get. There's a lot of variables that go along with all of these. And I think back to every conversation that we have is having a professional on your side is important. But it is the grain and the crops can fall under personal property. And you think about the value of some of that. And some of those farmers. And as farmers are aging, which we know that they are, this is one that could be really applicable to some of our listeners that have family that have grown up in the farm communities. And so that may have to go through court. And court can sometimes take a long time.
Yes, it can.
Yeah, so it's important. The third type in probate is tenants in common. That oftentimes gets confused with joint tenants with rights of survivorship. And that's when you actually name, and we know who the survivor is. But in a tenants in common situation, it refers to any type of property owned as joint, but does not have that rights of survivorship added on. And so the final one is community property, and we're just high level going to touch on this because Minnesota is not a community property state.
Right, we're not.
You got it. But Wisconsin is, and some of our snowbirds that head to Arizona is a community property. And so you just want to know what is going to happen to your assets upon passing, and if they are going to have to go through a probate situation, and how you can avoid that. So Now, to avoid probate, you can do that by having a contract in place. And that means that you have a built-in beneficiary relationship. So, Tony, I'm going to make this really simple and try to bring it back to some of the things that
Sure.
are practically that people know. Do you have a group life insurance policy through your employer?
Yes.
Okay. And so do you remember when you were signing up for that, did you put some beneficiaries down in the event that you were to pass?
Yes, and of course I initially put myself, and they said, no, you need to put somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm kidding. But yes, I do remember assigning beneficiaries.
Yeah, exactly. And so by doing that, you created a contract relationship.
Sure.
And you assigned, I hate to say it, when you pass, when you're sitting here looking at somebody, but in the event that you pass, that would go to somebody specific. And so it would avoid the probate process. You're naming and you're building in somebody to take that. A trust is also a contract. And so in that case, you hear so many people say, oh, don't worry about anything. I've set up a trust, right? Do you hear that from people all the time?
All the time.
Well, that is good, but you have to put things inside of your trust. And so a trust is a contract, but you have to actually build it out or put assets in it. And so there's two types of trust.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that and that process, and that's where your office comes in and you work alongside estate planning attorneys to make that happen, right?
Exactly.
You have to actually fund the trust or put something in it.
Yeah, I'm going to tell a quick story here. So many individuals are bright and intelligent and recognize the fact that something has to be put into a trust. Nobody has to tell them that. But what they might also be is somebody that doesn't get the other half of it done. And you need that accountability partner in place to check in with you to say, have you got all those pieces done? Because if not, it's just you've paid $3,000 to $5,000, maybe more, to have that put in place with absolutely no use or no value to it. And so having that professional alongside of you can, in simple terms, can be kind of an accountability partner along the way as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two types of trust. Tony, any chance you know those off the top of your head?
Yep. A revocable and irrevocable.
Good job. Very good.
Yep.
So exactly. So a revocable trust is run by the person who sets that up. And that's most common when you're setting up a trust and you are fairly simple situation, you're going to have it be a revocable trust.
Yeah, just went through this with my parents.
Great.
Yeah.
So this is, maybe you should be leading all this conversation, Tony. This is good. So just probably what you have done, the assets go into the trust and they can be taken out of the trust. So very simple. The second type of trust, so that you mentioned, is that irrevocable, and it's a trust that's run by a person or an entity outside of the person who set it up. And that's when assets begin to be gifted to the trust and they cannot be changed or modified or terminated without the beneficiary's approval. And that helps from a tax perspective. There's lots of reasons that you may choose to set up a irrevocable trust.
Right.
So a trust can be created either way, irrevocable or revocable, but the revocable trust becomes irrevocable when somebody passes. So just a few things on that. Okay, the final kind of property is that joint tenants with rights of survivorship. And this, again, is a legal arrangement that gives the surviving person ownership of the assets. An example of a joint account might be set up this way, and it also avoids probates. So that's a good option for people who might not have a lot of assets, but they need to make sure it's protected and sent the right way.
Yeah.
Whew, Tony, this is deep. It gets to be a lot and it can be overwhelming. And I find when we go through a lot of this stuff is you don't know what you don't know. And so when you start to put it into practical application, it may make sense in kind of a textbook's perspective and you understand what we're talking about. It's the what ifs or the I don't really know if I decide this, if I decide answer A, does it have impacts that I might not know? And so back to what we always talk about, partnering with a professional is really important along the way.
That's huge.
Tony, let's move into some of the practical things that we keep this a heck of a lot lighter for our listeners here. Can you think of any just practical things that they might want to know from an estate planning perspective?
Yeah, you need to have a comprehensive understanding of your assets, right?
Yeah.
That's key.
Absolutely.
I mean, and when assets, and people might think, well, of course I know what bank accounts I have and what investment accounts I have but a lot of people don't realize everything they have, all their assets, their property.
Yeah.
Not everybody has all that written out or in a document or a good handle on how many accounts they have. I mean, by the time you reach your 60s, you can accumulate a lot of different types of accounts and insurance contracts, and it can really build up.
You named it, Tony. In fact, I just got off of a call with a prospective client, and she's in a situation where her husband has been in the hospital for the last few days. They set an appointment with us a couple weeks ago, waiting to have that first appointment with us, and the husband has since gone in the hospital. And in March, he had a scare that they weren't sure he was going to make it. And so she has always been the person that's been more of the caregiver, has not been the financial person in her house. And so I think even if you're not sure if you want to work with a financial professional, going through the activity of at least doing a first or a second appointment with a financial professional allows you to get your house in order and become very familiar with the accounts that you have and what that looks like, especially if you are not the primary person that does this. It gets you organized, if nothing else.
It gets everybody on the same page, you and your spouse, if you have a spouse, number one. And then number two, you can realize it forces you to figure out what you have.
Yeah.
And that's and a financial professional can help you, a financial services professional or advisors you have there, I think, at Paladin Financial. That is so important because they help you stay on top of those accounts.
Yeah. I think oftentimes we meet with people who you have a dominant person that enjoys the financial side of things. They may not be even ready to give up because either A, it's a pastime or a hobby that they enjoy once they've retired, but the other individual in that unit doesn't understand the financial side. They don't have interest in it. And so even if you're preparing yourself for if the one that is the dominant person is going to pass, somebody else can be a partner along the way. So there's a lot of good to going through the activity of getting your financial house in order in preparation from an estate planning perspective.
Yeah, that's huge.
And I think another important thing to think about, Tony, and this is back to that common sense side of things, is who do you want to have inherit your assets, and making sure you have a clear understanding of your family tree and any of the legal requirements that might go along with that inheritance. And charitable giving. I think that's an important one to people.
Sure. A lot of people like to leave money to their church or a charity.
Absolutely. It's a great way to leave a legacy and to have, something that you, cause that's important to you, to have a important connection with that. So in conclusion, creating an estate plan is an important step to ensure your wishes are carried out as after you pass away, and just making sure that you partner with a legal professional to do that. I'm going to tie this back before we wrap up here to the financial side of things and really the tax side and the implications before we go. You can have all the documents in place, but we say at Paladin, documents, everybody, that's the first thing, what they think about. But there is this layer of strategy that's really important, and that starts well before you pass away and even before you maybe get that trust in place. There's so many things that are important to get in place, and understanding deadlines like the December 31st, 2025. You want to be taking serious look at what you can do, the next 3 years, and how to take advantage of before tax rates go up. And so there's these strategies that go along with it. So it's not just about getting some key documents in place, even though that's a great first step. We've kind of laced in the conversation about communication a few times as we've talked here, but the communication piece is one that people struggle with, and it's a really important one. And I don't mind being transparent on these podcasts. I think it helps bring some things to home. Those communications can take place in a variety of ways. One, it's with your family members, and they don't have to be really tough conversations. They can be simple conversations. And I'll tell you about one that I had with my mom. My mom passed in 2019. I remember exactly where we were driving. I was the driver. She was in the passenger seat. We knew that, her time was limited and that she was going to pass. And it was probably a 2 to 3 minute conversation, but it was a really powerful conversation. My parents are divorced. They've been divorced since I was 2 years old. My stepdad has been in my world since I was 3, married when I was 5 to my mom, and I have half brother and sister. And my mom shared with me that they were going to leave more of their assets to my half brother and sister because they knew my older brother and I would be taken care of from my dad. And it was a very simple conversation, and it was a great, there was no thoughts about it. It made complete sense to me. But if she wouldn't have had that conversation, do you think that I might have had questions on why it shook out like that?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You just don't know what you don't know, and you make up stories. And so it was logical, factual, simple, and short, but it gave all sorts of meaning to what they were doing because she told me why.
Yeah, that's important. I saw a lack of communication really drive a wedge between some of my dad's family members after his father passed. There were 4 kids, and it just could have been so easily avoided.
Yeah.
They're bad communicators anyway. They're farmers, English, very, reserved, and it's kind of funny, but in one sense you look back. But it's unfortunate that it causes disharmony, and if you want to keep harmony in the family, communicate, make sure everyone's included. If you have a lot of kids, make sure you communicate to all of them exactly what you want and why.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Our world has already become one in which you do Zooms and FaceTimes in place of showing up at Thanksgiving table or the Christmas table like you used to. And so bridging and that gap and doing everything you can to keep it a unit is important, even if it's a 2 to 3 minute conversations. It's really a powerful thing.
Yeah, good point.
The other side of communication, if it's, it's not just with your family members, it's with those professionals that are in your world. And one of the things that we do with our clients is we make sure that on an annual basis, we look at the beneficiaries of everybody's accounts and making sure those are actually set up how they were supposed to be, or if something has changed. But the other piece is as somebody gets their trust set up, we then sit down and we make sure that trust aligns back with all of the accounts that we have. And those are really important pieces, that you have communication with your tax professional, your attorney, and your financial professional, that they're all working in concert. And we do that on an annual basis as part of our annual review process.
Yeah, and you're looking at the big picture for your clients.
You got it.
And really making sure that all those things are aligned and where they need to be for their personal situation and needs. So I just think that's great. This is a great topic, and I'm looking forward to having an estate planning attorney come on the show to answer some questions that we might get from viewers and listeners in the meantime. I know a lot of people have a lot of questions about estate planning and how to leave things.
Absolutely. And surprisingly, a lot of times, and we are big advocates, that it really starts on the financial side of things. All right, Tony, with that, we're gonna wrap up the show today. Anything else that you can think of? I know you spend a lot of time with your parents and you're going through a lot of this, so you always add some valuable insight.
Well, I just it's what I said earlier. Communication is the key, but don't leave your loved ones in a bad situation. Work with a financial professional to make sure you're doing the right things to minimize that tax burden you're going to leave for loved ones, and make sure, you don't want it all to go to Uncle Sam. You want your kids to get their portion, and kids or grandkids. The more you can get done ahead of time, the better you're going to feel, and the better your kids are going to feel, and the better your family's going to be able to handle the loss. Nobody likes to talk about their passing or a spouse passing, but you've got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Tony, that was a good wrap up. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Paladin Financial Talk. If anything that we talked about today is of interest to you, call us at 651-842-8406. You can also visit us at paladinfinancial.com. We look forward to another episode soon.
All right. Thanks, Nikki. That does it for today's episode of Paladin Financial Talk.